What's stopping you from studying right now? Is it boredom, distractions, or simply the lack of motivation? Whatever the reason, we've all been there. Sitting in front of your books, knowing you should study, but feeling like you just can't get started. So why does this happen? More importantly, how can you fix it? Today, we'll break this down into simple steps. By the end of this video, you'll not only learn how to study when you don't feel like it, but you'll also have practical strategies to make it a habit, even when motivation feels non-existent. Let me show you how action leads to motivation, not the other way around. But first, let's do a quick self-check. Why do you think you scored lower than expected in your last exam? Why didn't you rank first? Have you ever thought about it? The truth is, the solution might be simpler than you think. If you want to succeed, you have to study. There's no way around it. The problem is, most people either don't have enough time to study, or when they do, they don't feel like it. Or worse, they forget what they studied after putting in the effort. Sound familiar? If yes, don't worry. We're going to fix this, one step at a time. Before we get into the actual methods, I want to share an idea that might change the way you think about motivation. Most of us believe that we need to feel motivated to take action. But according to Jeff Hayden, the author of Motivation is a myth. This belief is completely wrong. He explains that waiting for motivation to strike is a trap. Why? Because for successful people, the process works in reverse. For them, action comes first, and motivation follows. Let me explain. When you take action, like starting a task, you trigger a sense of accomplishment, which releases dopamine in your brain. That dopamine is what makes you feel good and motivated to continue. So the secret is to stop waiting for inspiration and just start doing the work. Once you start, the motivation will catch up. All right, now that you understand this, let's talk about how to study even when you don't feel like it. I'll break it down into 4 simple steps. Let's start with step 1. Step 1. Get clear on what to study. One of the biggest reasons people avoid studying is they don't have clarity. They don't know where to start. What subject should you focus on? How long should you study? When should you study? If you're unclear about these things, it's no surprise you don't feel like opening your books. Here's the fix. Create a simple plan. Let's say you decide, I'm going to solve 40 questions in 2 hours, from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. right after lunch. This is specific, it's clear, and it tells your brain exactly what to do. And here's the trick to make it even easier. Link this new habit to something you already do every day. For example, studying right after lunch. This method is called habit stacking, and it works because your brain is already used to the existing habit. Adding a new habit becomes so much easier when it's connected to something familiar. Think about it. You won't need to remind yourself to study because your brain will naturally associate finishing lunch with opening your books. Over time, this small action will become automatic. Once you have this clarity, what to study, when to study, and for how long, you've already overcome the first hurdle. But there's still one big question. How do you actually start? Step 2. Just start. The 5-minute rule. Now that you've planned out your study session, let's talk about getting started. This is often the hardest part, right? You sit there, stare at your books, and think, I'll start in 5 minutes. But then you end up scrolling your phone for an hour instead. Here's how to fix that. Use the 5-minute rule. Tell yourself, I'll study for just 5 minutes. That's it, just 5 minutes. It sounds almost too easy, but that's the point. Once you commit to those first 5 minutes, you'll find that continuing to study isn't as hard as you thought. The initial resistance fades away, and you're already in the flow. Think of it like this. Getting started is like pushing a heavy car. The first push is always the hardest, but once the car starts moving, it's much easier to keep it rolling. The same principle applies to studying. All you need to do is trick your brain into starting. Step 3. How to study for a longer period. So you've started studying, and now you're in the zone. But let's be honest. Staying focused for 2 or 3 hours at a stretch is tough. Even the most disciplined people find it hard. So, how can you keep your focus without burning out? This is where techniques like the Pomodoro technique and ultra-D sprints come into play. Let me explain both. The Pomodoro technique is super simple. You study for 25 minutes and then take a 5-minute break. After completing 4 rounds of this, you take a longer break, usually around 15 to 20 minutes. This method works really well because it gives your brain short periods of intense focus, followed by regular breaks to recharge. Now, if you're someone who can focus for longer periods of time, you might prefer Ultra-D and sprints. With this approach, you work for 90 minutes straight and then take a 20-minute break. Research shows that our brains naturally focus best in cycles of about 90 minutes, so this technique takes full advantage of how your brain works. Both of these methods help you avoid the mental burnout that comes from studying for hours without any breaks. More importantly, they give you a structure. Instead of thinking, I need to study for 3 hours, you're breaking it down into smaller, more manageable chunks. Now here's an extra tip. During your breaks, do something that completely disconnects you from studying. Stretch, get a snack, or even listen to a quick song. The key is to reset your brain so you're ready to focus again when the timer starts. But what if you're still struggling to focus during these study periods? Well, that's where motivation loops come in. Let's move to step 4. Close the motivation loop with rewards. This step might sound simple, but it's incredibly powerful. After you've completed a study session, whether it's 25 minutes or 90 minutes, you need to give yourself a reward. Why? Because rewards train your brain to associate studying with something positive. Think of it like this. Every time you finish a task and reward yourself, your brain releases dopamine, a chemical that makes you feel good. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. Study, reward, feel good. The more you repeat this loop, the easier it becomes to study because your brain starts craving that sense of accomplishment. Your reward doesn't have to be anything big. It can be as simple as having a cup of coffee, eating your favorite snack, or scrolling social media for 5 minutes. The key is to pick something that feels like a treat without taking up too much time. For example, let's say you've just finished a 2-hour study session. You could reward yourself by watching one episode of your favorite show, but make sure to set limits. Don't let a 20-minute episode turn into a 2-hour binge watch. The goal is to keep the reward small and controlled, so it motivates you without derailing your progress. By using rewards, you're not just tricking your brain into studying. You're building a system that keeps you coming back to your books day after day. And when you combine rewards with the earlier steps, creating a plan, starting small, and using time techniques, you'll find it much easier to stay consistent over the long term. Let's recap what we've covered so far. At this point, you've learned 3 important steps. Clarity. Know exactly what to study, when to study, and for how long. Use habit stacking to make studying part of your routine. Starting small. Use the 5-minute rule to overcome resistance and get started, even when you don't feel like it. Focus techniques. Use methods like the Pomodoro technique or Ultra-D and sprints to stay focused without burning out. And now, with step 4, you've learned how to close the motivation loop by rewarding yourself for your efforts. These rewards create a positive cycle that keeps you going, even when motivation is low. In the next part, we'll talk about why all of this works and how to make these steps a permanent part of your life. So far, we've covered how to get started with studying, how to stay focused, and how to reward yourself to build motivation over time. But you might still be wondering, why does this all work so well? What's the science behind it? Let's break it down. Why action comes before motivation. Most of us believe that we need to feel motivated before we can take action. But as we discussed earlier, successful people flip this idea on its head. For them, action comes first, and motivation follows. Here's why. When you complete even a small task, like studying for 5 minutes or solving one math problem, your brain releases dopamine. This chemical doesn't just make you feel good, it also drives you to do more. It's like giving your brain a small reward for taking action. The more actions you take, the more dopamine you release, and the more motivated you feel to keep going. Think of it like climbing stairs. The first step is always the hardest because you're at the bottom looking up. But once you take that first step, the next one feels easier. Before you know it, you're halfway up the staircase. This is exactly how motivation works. You don't wait for it. You create it by taking small, consistent actions. This is why techniques like the 5-minute rule and habit stacking are so effective. They lower the barrier to getting started, which triggers the dopamine release that keeps you going. Over time, this process becomes automatic. You don't need to force yourself to study because your brain starts craving the sense of accomplishment that comes from completing tasks. Why breaks are essential, not optional. Now let's talk about breaks. If you're someone who feels guilty about taking breaks while studying, here's some good news. Breaks aren't just helpful. They're necessary. Here's the science behind it. Your brain has a limited capacity for focused attention. Studies show that after about 90 minutes of intense focus, your productivity starts to drop. This is why techniques like the Pomodoro technique and ultradian sprints work so well. They align with your brain's natural rhythms, allowing you to work at peak efficiency. But here's the catch. Taking breaks doesn't mean scrolling your phone for half an hour. The best breaks are the ones that give your brain a true reset. For example, take a short walk, do some light stretching, grab a healthy snack, close your eyes and breathe deeply for a minute or two. These activities help your brain recharge without overstimulating it. When you return to studying, you'll feel refreshed and ready to focus again. How to build long-term study habits. Now that you know how to start studying and stay consistent, let's talk about making these strategies a permanent part of your life. After all, it's one thing to study for a week or two, but how do you turn it into a lifelong habit? The key is to focus on small, daily actions. Think of studying like brushing your teeth. You don't brush your teeth for hours at a time. You do it for a few minutes every day. It's the consistency that matters, not the intensity. Here's a simple formula to build long-term study habits. Start small. Commit to just 5 to 10 minutes of studying each day. Once this becomes a habit, you can gradually increase the time. Set a trigger. Use habit stacking to tie studying to an existing routine. For example, study right after lunch or dinner. Track your progress. Use a calendar or app to mark the days you studied. Seeing your progress visually can be a huge motivator. Celebrate wins. Remember to reward yourself, even for small accomplishments. Every completed task is a step closer to your goal. Over time, these small actions will add up. Studying will become less of a chore and more of a natural part of your day. And as your brain gets used to the dopamine rewards, you'll find yourself actually looking forward to studying. But what if you slip up? Let's be real. No one is perfect. There will be days when you don't feel like studying or when life gets in the way. And that's okay. What matters is how you respond. If you miss a day, don't beat yourself up. Instead, focus on getting back on track as soon as possible. Think of it like this. If you accidentally drop your phone, you don't throw it on the ground and stomp on it, right? You pick it up and move on. The same rule applies to studying. One missed day doesn't ruin your progress. Quitting does. So, whenever you feel like giving up, remind yourself why you started in the first place. What's your ultimate goal? Is it to ace your exams? Get into your dream college? Build a better future for yourself? Whatever it is, keep that goal in mind. Use it as your anchor to stay motivated, even when things get tough. Recap of the 4 steps. Let's quickly review everything we've covered so far. Clarity. Know exactly what you're studying, when you're studying, and for how long. Start small. Use the 5-minute rule to overcome resistance and get started. Study smarter. Use techniques like the Pomodoro technique or ultradian sprints to maintain focus and avoid burnout. Reward yourself. Close the motivation loop by celebrating your progress with small rewards. By following these steps, you'll not only learn how to study when you don't feel like it, but you'll also build a system that keeps you consistent over the long term. In the final part, we'll wrap everything up and talk about how to make studying an enjoyable part of your life, turning studying into a habit. All right, let's wrap this up. By now, you've learned that studying isn't just about waiting for the right mood or relying on motivation to magically show up. It's about taking control, creating systems, and turning small actions into consistent habits. But let's take a moment to reflect on what this really means. Think about this. Every time you sit down to study, even if it's just for 5 minutes, you're making a choice to improve yourself. You're building the foundation for the future you want. Whether it's acing your exams, getting into your dream college, or even just feeling proud of your efforts, every small step gets you closer to your goals. And the best part? It doesn't have to be overwhelming. Why, it's all about you. At the end of the day, no one else can do this for you. Sure, you can get advice, tips, and support, but the action? That's all on you. And that's a good thing because it means you have full control over your progress. Ask yourself this. What's one small thing you can do today to get closer to your goals? Maybe it's creating a study plan. Maybe it's setting a timer and starting with just 5 minutes. Or maybe it's deciding to reward yourself for completing a task. Whatever it is, take that first step. Once you do, you'll find that the next step is easier, and the one after that is even easier. And remember, it's okay to have off days. What matters is that you don't let a bad day turn into a bad week. Pick yourself up, adjust your plan if needed, and keep moving forward. Progress isn't about being perfect, it's about being consistent. The final takeaway. If you take one thing away from this video, let it be this. Action leads to motivation, not the other way around. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to wait for inspiration. Just start, even if it's small. Once you do, you'll create a positive loop that keeps you going. Here's a quick recap of what we've covered. Clarity is key. Know exactly what you're studying, when, and for how long. Start small. Use the 5-minute rule to overcome resistance and get started. Use focus techniques. Methods like the Pomodoro technique or ultra-dian sprints can help you study smarter, not harder. Reward yourself. Close the motivation loop by celebrating your wins, no matter how small they are. With these steps, you'll not only learn how to study when you don't feel like it, but also build a sustainable habit that sticks with you for life. A final challenge for you before you leave. Here's a small challenge. Take one of the steps we talked about and put it into action today. Maybe it's writing out a study plan, starting with 5 minutes, or even creating a reward system for yourself. Whatever it is, commit to it. You'll be surprised at how much of a difference one small action can make. If you found this video helpful, please like it and share it with someone who might need it. Let's help more people overcome the struggle of studying and reach their goals. And if you want more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Remember, your future self will thank you for the effort you put in today. So, start small, stay consistent, and keep going. You've got this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.